Welcome, everyone, to today's episode of Carefulist, the podcast. I'm your host, Katie Christophic, founder of The Carefulist. Today, we are talking with Patrick Cawley, who is an elder law attorney in the great state of Pennsylvania. Welcome to the show, Patrick.
Thank you so much, Katie, for having me on the show.
I am really glad that you're here. For those of you who follow The Carefulist, Patrick has written some really helpful and some of our most viewed blogs. I don't know if you knew that, but it's the truth. Some of our most viewed blogs. And we're going to talk about those topics a little bit later. But for now, we're going to start at the very beginning, which is Patrick's caregiving story.
So you want me to talk about my caregiving story? Well, I would answer that we all have a caregiving story. And I'm not going to answer that narrowly in the sense that maybe a lot of your listeners are listening because they think they're messing up everything with an older adult, whether it's their spouse or a parent. And there must be answers out there to all the things they're doing wrong. And I'm also a caregiver for an older adult who is experiencing cognitive decline. But before that, I was a caregiver for children. And before that, I had jobs where other people needed me to do things. They needed me to anticipate their needs. That's caregiving. That's being empathetic. And, it goes all the way back to childhood, my first job. But hopefully along the way, I have found ways to be a good caregiver in the sense that I know what people are depending on me for even before they realize it. So that's kind of the caregiving story. And there's hopefully examples throughout my life where I can say, well, there you were. You were anticipating, you were putting someone else before yourself, you were figuring out problems, and you were delivering for that person.
Yeah. So you hinted at it. I would love to hear a little bit more about your first job.
Uh, you were reading my website, weren't you?
It was. I love
So
the story. I definitely want people to hear it from you.
Well, I think what you're referring to is I allude to this on my law firm website, but as a child, I had a paper route. That was my first job, and so I mean, before I could drive, I was on my bike. I had the papers in the bag. I slung that over my shoulder, and I'd ride around the neighborhood. And as you do that, of course, once a month, I had to knock on the door and go into their living rooms and ask for a check for the newspaper. And you get to know people. But you also get to know their preferences. Some of them could not have been nicer. Some were a little rough around the edges. One in particular was emphatic that I get the paper to his front door before the sun comes up. I'm talking 5 a.m. He wanted his paper because that's when he sat down with his coffee to read it. And okay, what did I know? So I started getting up earlier, getting on my bike, and that's back to your first question. That's caregiving. That's what that person needed. He wasn't paying any more for that, as far as I know, to the newspaper, but I saw that as okay, that's what he needs, that's what I'll do. But going around and getting to know people, they talk to you while they're writing the check. You start to understand that they have family, they have concerns, they have things they're dealing with, mobility issues in the older clients, which I now see all the time in elder law. That was my first job and probably set the tone for what I was looking to do with my life going forward. In some respect, it had to.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I love that you include that story on the website. And that's why I wanted to talk about it because it certainly seems like a great precursor and foundation to what you do now.
Well, if nothing else, I think and I don't even know if there are children out there still delivering papers. Do they still use child labor? I don't think so. But, there's something to it as far as discipline. Were there mornings I did, especially when it was cold or rainy, did I want to get up and go deliver papers? When my friends had other things to do that were more fun, did I want to go do my job? No. But it's learning that discipline of it's not always about what you want to do.
Mhm.
You're going to do what needs to be done. So there's that. But also just the personality issues and everything that followed. But I think that was really the value. I'm so glad that my parents encouraged me to do it, not just to have a little bit of spending money as a kid, but to develop that discipline.
Right. Yeah, when I was a kid, I did not have a paper route, but I was involved in certain activities at school where you could raise money to help fund those activities. I did music stuff. So I would go around in my neighborhood selling, in the fall, I think it was like cheese and sausage or something. And then in the spring, it was chocolates and candy for Easter and Passover and all of that. So I would go in to everybody's living room, and some of them were short visits, and some of them were really long visits. And at some point, my mom would actually call around the neighborhood, like, where is she? She has been gone for a long time. And you do start to see things. Some folks are a little bit lonely. This person's having a harder time getting around their house than they did the last time you visited. So then, I would go home and say something to my mom, like, Mrs. So and so seems like she's having a harder time, and magically in my head, it was magic, but I'm sure my mom behind the scenes was talking with other neighbors about this person might need some help with raking leaves or whatever, and everybody would kind of come together. So that was my first foray into this idea of community and caregiving and kind of keeping tabs on how folks are doing.
That makes sense. It's not just you started out, you wanted to be involved in music. You didn't want to have to sell anything, but you did it
Right.
anyway. And then even if you didn't have the words, the vocabulary for what you were witnessing, like your mom did, uh,
Mhm.
it left an impression.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, you fast forward, I had a career in sales when I first came out of school. It's like, oh, gee, where did that start? And then what I'm doing now, obviously, it's focused in and around caregiving, and it's because of my family's personal experience with my mom's Alzheimer's journey and the way that that all transpired. But there is so much that occurs in those formative years that really influences you later on. And obviously, you don't know it at the time that that's what's happening. But I think for a lot of people, if they take a minute and look back at what was interesting to them or what they did for a job, whether it's their first job as a teenager or earlier, it really does influence who you become later.
I'm convinced of it. And I've done no empirical study of this or anything, but in all of the families I see who are going through a caregiving journey with an older adult, I just see this in elder law. You pretty routinely see that there's one, let's say, of the adult children, there's one who steps up, does everything tirelessly. They must be exhausted, but they're doing everything while there's some other sibling who can't be bothered or worse is criticizing the one who's doing everything. And I wonder if we could trace this back in every case, would we find that earlier on in life, the one who's doing everything was always somebody who stepped up and learned that selflessness, that discipline, that do what has to be done, even if you don't want to do it. I wonder, but I'm pretty
Yeah.
confident in my guess that that's the case.
Yeah. And that's an interesting point too. It probably also lends itself to a personality type as well. The one who
Sure.
steps up, that's they're sort of hardwired that way from the beginning, I would think.
Right. I don't know if the personality type comes first or if it's molded through action, which
Mm,
is what you and I did as
yeah.
young people. Action formed our character. I'm not sure which way it works. That's way over my head and my skill set and experience, but it's definitely something I observe and wonder about.
Yeah. Likewise. Yeah. As someone who has the privilege of talking to lots of folks from lots of different backgrounds on a regular basis, you start to notice patterns, right? So you said something interesting that, I realize is a complex conversation. And it is that relationship between siblings or other family members who are involved in planning for someone's care. Um, the successful people or the successful relationships that come into your office, what does that look like? What do they do differently than the folks who maybe don't get along so well? Have they prepared in some way that's different?
Well, ideally, this is such an outstanding question that I hammer it with everybody. I mean, so elder law is estate planning when everybody's healthy. Then
Mhm.
we use that as the foundation to get through care needs, and ultimately it's you want the estate, the lifetime of savings of the person to be administered properly and without, family members warring over that. So it
Mhm.
all ideally starts in the very first conversation, and even before that, because I do a lot of public education on this, and I'm encouraging people with stories of what I see to consider who are the people in your life and who will stand in your shoes if necessary while you go through some health challenges, and who are the people who are you are considering, but who are you ruling out, who are you ruling in, and it might just be availability. Although it's not a deal breaker, if you're choosing a child to stand in your shoes, and I'm talking about a power of attorney, a healthcare power of attorney, some sort of proxy where someone else is acting like you because
Mhm.
life goes on, um, are they available? Are they busy with six kids and traveling the country for work, or can they be there? Geographic proximity might have something to do with that, but will they team up? If there's multiple children or friends, nieces, nephews, how will they communicate with each other? Will the left hand know what the right hand is doing? Even if they're communicating, do they have a history of resolving any sort of disagreements? It's people don't think this through enough. I mean,
Yeah,
it's bad enough that when people find out what I do for a living, they think, oh, I guess I need a will. Yes, that's one part of an overall plan, but that does nothing for you in a caregiving situation.
right.
So that's going to be a mess. So then to take them to the next level and think about what it really looks like. And
Mhm.
fortunately, enough people have been where you have been, or where I have been, where we're caring for someone in our life, and you see how it plays out for better or for worse, and then that informs their decisions. But it's really about getting a clear picture of if I can't do all the things that at this point I just take for granted, I'll get my taxes done, I'll pay my bills, I'll, sign forms. If I can't do that because of a car accident or a stroke or dementia, then who am I putting into that role, and how is that really going to play out? And the more clarity you can get on that with personalities and commitment and availability, the better, the more likely that your legal plan will actually work.
Yeah. And one of the misconceptions I think a lot of folks have about power of attorney is that, okay, something happened and someone is incapacitated. So now I can go into a lawyer's office and say, I need power of attorney. That is not how that works. Can you explain the way power of attorney actually works?
Yes, yes. So the person who's giving, if I'm giving you, Katie, the ability to sign my name on a form to get into my bank accounts and pay my bills and do all the things that I would normally do, I have to do that while I understand that I'm giving you that incredible power, that authority. I have to know that I'm doing it. I have to think it through. Every state has court decisions on what the level of understanding has to be. And it's certainly, and there is no state in the United States where the person can already be uh, gravely incapacitated by some health challenge and then they sign a power of attorney. Now, I will quickly add that if people are experiencing a dementia journey or some other sort of cognitive decline, it may not be too late. It's a functional test, as far as understanding. You don't have to say down to the penny how much money you have, as long as you own stuff, and
Mhm.
you can point to the person who, well, if I have to hand my stuff over to that person for management, I trust that person. I mean, it's not nothing, but there's at least a little bit of a bar you have to clear. But
Yeah.
functionally, some people can still do that. But it's certainly not. No, we are well into the dementia journey. The person really doesn't remember who I am, and I want that person to sign a power of attorney. that will not be ethically permitted. It's not a valid leak. It's open to challenge. Somebody could challenge it in court and they would win. So, no,
Mhm.
it's definitely something you do well in advance.
Yep. And so for the folks who haven't done it in advance and maybe thought that's the way it worked, what is the route they need to take
So
to
it
be able to have those powers?
To have the authority, right? So
Yeah. Thank you.
that's
I couldn't think of the
the
word.
yeah the consequence of not making your own plan. So if I don't make that plan to empower you, Katie, to pay my bills and make medical decisions and all of that, in all 50 states, the government has a plan if you don't make one for yourself. And I don't know who it's going to be because I didn't take the time to think through. Katie is the person for this job. Instead, it goes by different names in different states, but it's guardianship and conservatorship, where
Mhm.
you go to the local court, you petition, you have to put on evidence, you have to put on a doctor as a witness and say, here's why this person, who's there, by the way, this is all happening in their presence. This person cannot tell the difference between a bank statement and a bill. They're not paying bills. The creditors are getting angry. They're a target for scammers, and they're not able
Mhm.
to fend off manipulation or trickery. And they're not, making healthy decisions on the medical side. They're not going to doctors and eating, taking medication. So a judge hears all of that evidence and then appoints somebody. And then there's all kinds of formalities to avoid elder abuse, where there's now a report to the state. That'll vary state to state, but in Pennsylvania, it's once a year. There's an annual report about all of the decisions that have been made. So that's the alternative, and it's much more complicated and involved than simply sitting down while you're healthy and or healthy enough to understand and appoint someone you trust and have a seamless plan.
Yeah. Those are important distinctions. And so when we think about those two circumstances, ideally, we set up the power of attorney ahead of time. So if we are looking at the ideal situation, what is the ideal? When do people set this up? Is it the moment they turn 18 and they are an adult and now they have to have a plan because accidents happen? Or is it later? What's the ideal?
So when you hear elder law, you assume all of my clients are, at least 85, but that's not true. We have a number of younger clients and but say the people I work with are in their 50s and they complete their own estate plan or they're even their 40s and then they have a child who's graduating from high school. What do you know? They're coming right back to for the child because the parents realize, wait a second, if this child goes off to college and needs to go to the doctor, I am not going to get any information. I may not be able to make medical decisions for my child. If the child has financial aid issues, I don't have the authority to speak for my child. So they start to get it that at 18, a power of attorney and a healthcare power of attorney are pretty darn important. Maybe the child doesn't need a will because they don't own anything, but
Mhm.
those are the two fundamental pieces. And 18 is when it starts. Now, how many people are actually motivated to do that? Far fewer than the people who start to realize, wait, I'm not a man of steel. I could actually get injured or sick, and so I
Yeah.
ought to have this set up.
Yeah. Well, and that is really interesting point. I'm thinking because I have a kid who will be 18 in a few years. I mean, we've got time. But if you set up power of attorney, at least from healthcare proxy, so I guess my first question is those are two different things.
It depends on the state.
Okay.
I think California still does it as one piece, but most states have moved towards understanding that there's different audiences, the
Mhm.
financial institutions and the hospital, and you don't want the hospital wading through manage my investments and deal with
Yeah.
taxes and all of that. You want them getting right to the medical piece. But whether it's one piece in your state or two, making sure conceptually that someone is in place to make anything of a financial or property related decision and also be able to make medical decisions for a person who can't speak for themselves.
Yeah. So the second part of my question then is, as that young adult ages, if and when they get married, if a parent still has, say, health power of attorney, does that need to get updated? Does the marriage then try? I can see how that could get kind of tricky.
Sure. A couple of things. All of this is changeable. It's
Mm,
revocable. It's you update it as the circumstances of your life change. I'm
mm,
glad you mentioned marriage because a lot of married people out there assume that I don't need a power of attorney to speak for my husband or my wife. Yes, you do. Just try calling the, Fidelity or Vanguard or whoever has their IRA and try to move money around and say, well, it's a legal arrangement. We're married. That won't work. But the broader point is that as your life changes, as the people in your life change, the relationship might go south, or their health might go south. Well, then you just change the document and empower somebody else.
yeah, that's really good to know, especially about the marriage piece with the power of attorney. I didn't know that.
That's pretty, it catches a lot of people by surprise. Well, I'm assuming we're naming our children to speak for us, but in the meantime, we'll speak for each other. Yes, with a power of attorney, you will speak for each other. So that does catch people by surprise. But I've heard all
Yeah.
the stories of the spouse trying to call, let's say, wife calling husband's insurance company, and the husband's there but has had a stroke or has dementia, and the insurance company tries to help, and they say, "Well, can you at least put the phone up to his ear and get him to say yes, you can speak for him?" Even that's
Mhm.
bending the law. But where it won't work because of what's going on with the husband's health, you're out of luck, wife. You have to have a power of attorney.
Right. Wow. Good to know.
Yeah,
I'm so glad you brought that up because that is certainly an assumption that I made.
you're not
Now I'm
alone.
just thinking of the things that we need to add to our to-do list. My husband listens to all of these podcasts, so sorry, honey. Um, so wow, you said so many things that are really good to think about. I mentioned earlier about the blogs that you wrote for us. Um, and they were in two parts. So we can talk about them in their own little silos. The first is in reference to the IRS and taxes and all of that bucket of information and how that works when you are a caregiver and you're trying to handle those things on behalf of someone else, and the types of documentation that you need and what the process is, because it is not as straightforward as one might think.
Right. Well, and first of all, your website, carefulist.com, is just jam-packed with helpful information. And I know this has been a labor of love for you, but you are to be commended for
Mm,
putting
thank you.
information from various sources because that drives home the point in caregiving that this is not a one-person job. It takes a team. There are a lot of resources out there from the elder law to the financial advisors to the real estate folks who help with downsizing to grief counseling. I mean, it's just the list goes on and on and on. So I would recommend that people go check it out, and in particular the blog. So I did talk about that, and this is so frustrating for me personally in the sense that I work so hard to get over the hump of people thinking that, well, if I have a will, I'm good to go. I don't need to do any other legal planning when that does nothing in the event of a decline in health while you're still alive. So I
Yeah.
work very hard to get people thinking about the power of attorney and medical decision making. And then I have to tell them, okay, good job. You got this done. You empowered another person. That's a seamless incapacity plan. You thought about the right person. You gave so much thought to this. Now I got to tell you the impediments, the obstacles that your chosen decision maker is going to run into. And one of them is that federal agencies generally don't just automatically accept the power of attorney. And you might have listeners who have gone through law school and wondering, well, how is that even possible? The Constitution says Pennsylvania respects California law and vice versa, and the federal government should respect every state's law on powers of attorney, but they don't. So there's a bit of a process, and the blog about this goes into it. But the end result with the IRS is that among many responsibilities where you step up for a family member who's having a decline in health, you're paying bills, you're managing real estate, you're doing all kinds of things depending on the circumstances. But one thing we all face is there's an income tax return and something has to get filed. And if your person, your family member is not filing it, then you need to lead the way on that. But when you go to try to use you can't just sign your name on the 1040 and say, I'm the POA. There's a form. It's for most people, it will be the form 2848. But you're doing that before it's time the tax deadline comes because you have to be recognized by the IRS as the representative of this person.
Mm.
So you're submitting your power of attorney and you're saying, look, this person trusted me enough under the state law that you should be following IRS, but okay, show me your form. I'm going to fill out 2848. I'm going to, if you're a guardian, you still have to fill out a form. That's form 56. So you're just submitting it and you're being recognized as the representative in the eyes of the IRS. You're filling out exactly what you anticipate filing for the person, like their income tax return, their 1040. Okay, you're filling that out, you're getting recognized, then you can move forward and get the person's taxes done. So it's another thing where don't wait till the deadline and realize, oh no, this isn't happening. So
Yeah.
that's just one example of federal agencies making you fill out some forms and jump through some hoops.
Yeah. So, what is the ideal timeline that someone who has to file taxes on behalf of someone else, when should they start that process to make sure they get the form filled out and approved, and so they're not running up against those crunch time deadlines?
Well, as soon as see, that's hard to answer
Okay.
uh, because when I give talks to people in my community and I'm describing how you plan for incapacity that could very well strike in the future, and I talk about you're empowering someone else, there's always somebody who says, wait a second, I love my kids, I trust my kids, but I still don't want to hand over my life to them until I
Mhm.
absolutely have to. So, there a separate form than the one I mentioned, 2848, where you could empower them to file your taxes well in advance? There is. I have to think it's exceedingly rare that anybody actually does that just because of human nature that no, I will control this
Mhm.
as long as I possibly can. But I think so. And then the other reason it's complicated is let's say it's cognitive decline. It's not like there's a car accident. You know immediately that you are now in a caregiving role, you're taking over. It's sort of
Mhm.
a gradual process of earning
Yes.
trust and let me do this for you, mom. Let me do this for you, dad. And then there's a comfort level on both sides
Mhm.
that there's a shared responsibility where that's happening. I'm not sure where. I mean, probably earlier rather than later. Have the form filled out and be recognized by the IRS just in case. But you because eventually the bad days might outnumber the good as far as cognitive clarity, and you want to
Mhm.
be ready to go, and you don't want that to be April 14th when that happens.
Right. Yeah. I was just thinking for all of these processes and for a family who has had a child who was born with special needs or medical complexity, as they age out of being a child and age into being an adult, is that process of paperwork the same, or is that a different avenue that they have to travel?
So are you asking how do we plan for that now adult child who has special needs to have someone to take care of details for them?
Yes.
Right. So it's going to depend heavily on the functional abilities of that person. So they call autism a spectrum for a reason. So it
Mhm.
might be that the person that adult child can have their own power of attorney, name the parents, maybe as a backup option, name a sibling or a cousin or somebody.
Mhm.
But if it's a more if it's a special need that is much more debilitating as far as handling those responsibilities, then it's guardianship court, and you do that as soon as the child turns 18.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. I know that seemed like a bit of a left turn, but I was thinking as you were saying, you can't always plan these things ahead, which obviously makes sense. The other end of that spectrum is you know that this is coming, this is what life is, and what does that look like and how do you plan for that?
Right. And it's really the same thing. It's just
Yeah.
recognizing, wait, not just for me, but now my child is going to be an adult, may not be able to handle all of the responsibilities. Um, Very often for special needs planning, there's not just a power of attorney or guardianship or conservatorship, depending on the functional abilities of the child, but there might be some sort of special needs trust as well. So
Mhm.
that'll have an incapacity role because any property, whether it's financial accounts or real estate, anything that goes into that trust, the trustee will be the incapacity player, the one who's managing everything. So it goes beyond just the power of attorney. That might play a role as well, but there's still signing names on forms. And if it's a federal agencies, another one that comes up both for adults and for a child with special needs, the Social Security Administration. And I wrote
Yes.
a blog piece for you as well on that, where again you're showing them, look, I it's not irrelevant that there's a power of attorney. That shows a sign of trust, but you still have to fill out some forms, and there you're being recognized as representative payee or rep payee, as we say in the business. And so when you become rep payee, you have responsibilities for any money coming from Social Security, whether it's SSI or SSDI for a child with special needs, or whether it's the adult's retirement income. You have to handle that in a very particular way, but you can't even do that until you are recognized as rep payee.
Yeah. I remember reading that blog entry and having my mind just blown about how different that is from all of the other processes.
It is. I mean, it's different in one respect, even different from the IRS in the sense that you
Yeah.
have to call and make an appointment and go in person to a Social Security Administration office and then complete the forms. They're taking it really seriously. If we
Mhm.
name you to receive the Social Security check, you have to set up a bank account that says your representative payee, that will be right in the account. It's a special kind of account. You don't mix that with anything else. You have to make annual reports showing, and then it's about record keeping. So let's
Mhm.
let's not figure out that I should have been keeping records later on when you're making a report with nothing. So that's why, I recommend some record keeping tools like Advocord. My fellow Pennsylvania attorney Nancy Myers came up with Advocord. It's a website, but it's a great way to organize documents and records, whether you're acting as a power of attorney for someone or representative payee, guardian, conservator.
Mhm. Yeah. It is much more complex than people, I think it is, but I also think people realize it's complex and so then they don't even want to dive into it. And that's how we end up with this endless cycle of
Well,
people
there's no
aren't
need
ready
for
and then they're scrambling. Right.
Yeah, overwhelm is not helpful. So it's just, that's where your website really helps because you're just breaking it down. Just anticipate this is a little more complicated than it probably needs to be and that
Mhm.
you think it is, but get a little bit of guidance. People get through this every day, and so can you.
Yeah. So, a couple of things. When someone makes an appointment with an elder care, keep saying elder care because that's what I use the most often.
People say
Elder
that all the
law
time. It's okay.
attorney, what are the things under your umbrella that they can get taken care of?
It probably depends on the elder law attorney because
Okay.
I know of some very, very rare, I would say, but some elder law attorneys do nothing but go to court and fight over financial exploitation of older
Mm,
people. Most
okay.
don't do anything like that. I'd say for most elder law attorneys, it's estate planning, it's long-term care guidance, and it's administering an estate when someone passes away, but some place a little more emphasis on guardianship or conservatorship. Some
Mhm.
place a whole lot of emphasis on special needs children and navigating the resources that are available for them. And what would separate us from the run-of-the-mill attorney who says, I practice estate planning, I'll write your will for you? Well, we see how it all works out, and we're a little more holistic, and we're anticipating government benefits. So, whether that's the child with special needs or the parent who is having challenges just as they get older, we're anticipating how do you pay for long-term care? And sometimes the rules there, if you think that using a power of attorney with the IRS is complicated, wait till you see Medicaid to pay a nursing home. It's mind-boggling. It's so complicated, but we build that into the planning very early on. So it's probably that's the general, and then some have more resources in-house as far as care coordinators than others.
Mhm.
And if they don't have it in-house, they definitely have relationships with providers of services to older adults and people with special needs.
Okay. Yeah. And that leads me to my other question, which you may or may not be able to answer. I might be putting you on the spot here. But you mentioned that for the Social Security piece, people must be present physically in the Social Security Administration building. Some folks live pretty far from one of those. Do you, is there a way to get people there who may not have transportation? Do you know of like, is there a service um, or anything that might make it easier for folks to be able to get there?
Well, it's not if memory serves, and I hope this doesn't vary by region around the country, but it's the person who will be making the decision. So if the older adult will say is in the
Oh,
hospital, there's no expectation that that person go to the
okay.
office. It's wherever the, let's say, the child is or the spouse is,
Yeah.
they go to the Social Security office and fill out the forms.
Okay. Well, I'm glad I asked. That clears
Yeah.
that up for me. I was thinking the person receiving the benefit was the one who needed to show up. Okay.
No, no, and in fact, I would say, if there's a care need, having that documented. Here's a note from the last doctor visit that just
Hmm.
shores up the whole case that the adult child is making. That I need to be the representative payee. I need to do this, or I need to be recognized by IRS. This is why. That only shores it up. And then if you already had a power of attorney naming you, even better. It just goes
Hmm.
to consistently being recognized as that responsible person.
Yeah. Okay. So the ideal client walks in through your door. What have they already prepared? What do they come into your office with that makes the conversation get straight to the point and you can accomplish what you need to accomplish?
That person has an instruction manual for their life. They've written down whose name is on the deed to their home and any other real estate. They've written down every account they have. And it's not really just for me. It's
Hmm.
for the people who might have to step up with a power of attorney one day and make sense of what bills am I paying? Are the required minimum distributions being taken from the retirement accounts? Because you
Yeah.
find out later, wow, there's a huge tax penalty because they weren't doing that. And I didn't know to do it. So they have their accounts. If there's any special issues with their real estate, you have to jiggle the faucet on the side of the house a certain way to get it to work. The more they've done that, that shows me that they're really preparing someone else to stand in their shoes and figure out how it's going to work in a period of incapacity. Or when it comes time to administer the estate, the full instruction manual is there. So I think that goes a really long way, just having someone who they've organized. This is everything about my life. Passwords, all of the things that we have between our own ears, but that's no help to anybody else if they're trying to help us.
Yeah. So one of the tools you had mentioned Advocord, which I think is great for organization. Um, there's another tool that helps you pull all of that paperwork together, passwords and things like that, called the knock box. It's the next
Yes.
of kin box. So I know a number of folks have recommended it to us, which is why we list it as a resource. But for folks listening at home going, I don't even know where I'd start, they give lots of really good prompts.
Yes.
Um, so one of the other questions I have is this notion of there's a document called the Five Wishes. And my understanding is it is a legally binding document. So if you complete it with what you want for your care, it's a legal document. I'm
Well, they say it
wondering
is.
if well, that's my question. How legal is it? Does it trump a POA that you have in place, or where does that fall in the scheme of things?
The emphasis of in Five Wishes is great. Don't hear me to say anything differently. But whether it's a companion to a legal document or whether it's the sole thing and you expect it to be honored, that those are two different questions. And
Okay.
this is all driven by state law. So when I compare Five Wishes to Pennsylvania law, does it hit a lot of the markers of what is there to be followed? It seems to, but then it's a lengthy exercise because it really gets into a lot of what are your values and all kinds of things that when you have the ICU healthcare professionals, are they saying, look, we just need to know, are we going to do a nasogastric tube for nutrition or are we not? Because the person doesn't have that much time left and this is the only thing that would be keeping them alive. Getting right to those, state law tends to be pretty streamlined as far as here are the answers that the healthcare professionals need, and the person who will be the patient needs to think it through and make those decisions. So it's a little more voluminous, and I think very often that's good because it sparks conversations,
Okay.
and the adult child standing at the foot of the hospital bed has to channel what would my parent say if my parent could communicate right now? And when you have that much information that Five Wishes gets to, I think that can only help. But is
Mhm.
that a standalone or is it a supplement to a legal document? I think that's going to vary from state to state, and what the requirements are. Ultimately, I would say that unlike the IRS or the Social Security Administration or your bank,
Yeah.
the hospital is a little more forgiving of formalities as long as the family's getting along.
Mhm.
If it doesn't appear that there's a family feud going on in the hospital room and they're going to get sued, they're pretty much just going to look at that and say, "Are you all on board with this? Good, let's follow it." And that'll
Mhm.
be that.
Yeah. Well, and oh, I'm glad you touched on that. Um, there is an episode of The Pit, which I don't know if you've watched, but there is a caregiving situation where there is an older gentleman who's brought in, he has dementia, and he has his wishes, not on Five Wishes, but what he wants in a legal document. And the children, the adult children, push back. And then the hospital starts to do what the adult children want versus what happens to be written in that legal document. I would love to know your thoughts since that's a hypothetical situation, but it's a situation that happens in reality, I would imagine.
Happens a
Um,
lot.
you know, I have my thoughts on which one should win. But from a legal standpoint, what what should it be? Should it be the legal documentation? I would imagine.
So, yeah, if you talk to some elder law attorneys, they'll say that the living will, which is usually the second half of the healthcare power of attorney, if that's a separate document in your state, the first half
Mhm.
you're saying who is speaking for me, who's saying yes or no to a treatment. The second half, when you get to the living will, however that's expressed in your state, that is, look, if the team of specialists gets together and says, there's an unfixable problem, we're in the dying process now, and how much
Mhm.
do we want to extend the days of life as opposed to adding life to the days and palliative care and hospice care and pain management and so forth. And
Mhm.
where someone takes the time to fill out a living will, and they make very clear the way I talk to my clients is think about it like the seesaw. On the one hand, we might be focusing on extend the days of life, treatment, but you're going to go through some discomfort first versus the seesaw flips the other way and it's care. We're focusing on comfort right now. That's because the primary goal is not extending the days of life. And if somebody, what's the difference? What makes the seesaw flip from one side to the other? How every individual person defines their quality of life. What
Yeah.
brings me joy? When I can no longer do that, we're getting towards care, not treatment.
Mhm.
If I, but that's going to be different for everybody. So when someone takes the time to fill that out and really give thought to what brings them joy, what quality of life looks like, and then it gets disregarded by children, that goes to the idea that a lot of attorneys, maybe just tired, exhausted attorneys, say, this is nothing more than a wish list. And I've had clients who worked in ICUs and they see what the living will says, and they see the adult children continuing to push for more treatment,
Yeah.
do chest compressions if the heart stops, do tube feeding of food and water, and they just keep treating and treating and treating. And
Yeah.
it's frustrating even for the healthcare professionals sometimes. But ultimately, I've heard stories where the hospital pushes back or the doctor pushes back and says, this
Mhm.
is not what the living will says. But it's a conversation. I mean, if the children are gonna, if they're all in uniformly saying this is what we're gonna do, even though it's not what my parent wanted, they're most likely gonna follow what the children say.
Yeah. Boy, that's such a tough situation for the health staff to be put in.
It is.
Um, and I wanted to put voice to that because for folks who may find themselves in a situation where, yeah, I lost my mom, it is really hard to watch a parent die, but it's not about you.
Right.
And as the child, that parent-child relationship, that can be really hard because as the child, it's always been about you because you're the child, but you're also an adult now in many cases. And
So well
sometimes you just
put.
have to make those very tough choices.
Absolutely right. And the only thing that I can think to tell people, and sometimes they're telling me, I hope this is honored by my kids because I know what we did caring for our parent.
Hmm.
The only thing I can tell people is practice. And that what does that mean? You have conversations. It doesn't, strike a lot of people as light dinner table conversation, but it's reminding them look, whether you have to, threaten to haunt them one day or however you get your message across, it's saying, this
Yeah,
is important to me. Do you
right.
understand this is important to me? And would you carry this out? And can you get yourself in the frame of mind of what that'll be like to see me in a hospital bed and where the person where the child keeps breaking down crying, maybe not have them in a decision-making role at all because not that's not a
Exactly.
knock on that child, it's just not their skill set. So
Right.
conversations go a long way.
Yeah. And I'm very glad you said that because that's what I was driving at is it comes back to making sure the person that you name in that moment, that hardest moment of their life, can they rise to the challenge of doing what's right for you?
Very well put.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing all of your expertise. You certainly cleared a lot of things up for me. So I really, really appreciate what you shared with us today.
It's been a real pleasure. I love thinking about these things as much as you do, and I'm so glad we got to have this conversation.
Thank you. And so, for the folks who are in Pennsylvania who may want to specifically seek out your help, what is the name of your practice and where can they find you?
We are Keystone Elder Law, so people in the Keystone state of Pennsylvania will know that's a pretty commonly used business name. But Keystone Elder Law, and our firm is keystoneelderlaw.com. I try to answer a lot of questions if you search Keystone Elder Law in YouTube. But a lot of them do have a Pennsylvania spin to it. So hopefully, I can at least provide education to people. We're in South Central PA, just outside of Harrisburg and Hershey. And I know other elder law attorneys. If you're in Pittsburgh, Philly, Erie, I can send you in the right direction.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Patrick. And for those of you at home or in the car or wherever you are, thanks for listening, and we will catch you next time. Till then, take care.